An eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind. You must be the change you wish to see in the world. Beautiful evocations. Yes, Mahatma Gandhi is one of the iconic figures of political dissent in global history. He was, of course, instrumental in winning independence for India, and his campaign of non-violent civil disobedience has inspired social movements across the world. It continues to, as it does the work of his granddaughter, Ela Gandhi, herself a prominent peace activist. Ela is in Australia this week. She lived under house arrest for 9 years during the Apartheid era in South Africa for her political work and views. But she went on to serve as a parliamentarian with the ANC for a decade when they came to power in South Africa. And she says she's sort of retired. I'm not convinced. Today she runs a host of projects in her grandfather's name and is the trustee of the Gandhi Development Trust. And she joins us right here on the program this morning. Welcome, Ela, and welcome to Australia.
Thank you, and good morning to all of you.
Tell us why you're in Australia. You're actually here to launch a very interesting centre that mirrors a centre that you're also involved in at Durban University in South Africa.
Yes, it's the International Centre of Nonviolence. We started the centre in South Africa about 4 years ago. And the whole idea was to look at how we can promote nonviolence in the community, in society, through education and so on. So it had an academic approach, and therefore we are based at the university. And
see, an academic approach is interesting, isn't it? Because you are living in the heart of a country, South Africa, where violence, domestic violence, is at the highest rates in the world. The figures are extraordinary. Yes. One figure I read had it that 60,000 women and children experience domestic violence each month. Yes. But the levels of rape are staggering as well. So there's a kind of practical need as much as anything at the moment in South Africa, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. And everyone in South Africa is concerned about the levels of violence. It's not just the domestic violence that concerns us, the domestic violence and rape and violence against children, but also social violence where movements that are demonstrating for social services and so on, legitimate movements. But they feel that unless they are violent, they can't get the attention of the authorities. And that is growing also in South Africa and I think internationally. So we are looking at how can we curb this and look at nonviolent means, effective nonviolent means of struggle.
Well, you were right at the heart of the struggle against the apartheid regime in South Africa, and many would argue that actually combative, perhaps violent action was instrumental in overturning that regime.
That is one perception, but in reality, if you look at the nonviolent movement, for instance, within the country, we had mass democratic movement that was, led by various organizations, including the religious organizations and so on, which brought together a massive unity amongst the people who were opposed to apartheid. That was one which was very effective within the country. The second nonviolent movement was the movement that was started by the anti-apartheid organizations, and many of them here in Australia and in other countries that non-violently demonstrated against the apartheid regime in South Africa. They, boycotted South African products. They went on massive boycotts of sports, which affected the apartheid regime directly.
It's interesting saying that boycotting products is a non-violent act, because actually in this kind of corporatised era, many companies would say, well, that is a violent act. You're compromising our rights as consumers. But let's not go down that pathway. Take us back to your childhood. You were 8 when your grandfather died, I think.
Yes, 7.
7. Did you have a
7.
relationship with him? What do you remember of him as a child?
Yes, absolutely. When I was about 6 years old, my parents went to visit India. And this is just a fortunate thing in my life, because if they hadn't gone and hadn't taken me, I wouldn't have seen my grandfather at all, because I was born and brought up
In South Africa?
in South Africa. So in 1946, we went to India, and during that time, we spent time with my grandfather in his ashram, staying with him and seeing him daily, and spending time with him. So yes, I really cherish that memory, and I think that was special for me.
And you grew up, I think, in the Phoenix settlement in South Africa, is that right? Then this was a kind of communal community, like an ashram,
Yes.
in South Africa, which still lives on today. Is it still as influential as it was?
Not really. At the present moment, it is a place where people go for spiritual, for, just inspiration, because there is a museum there which depicts the life of Gandhiji, but also looks at his neighborhood, at that time. He chose that particular land, which was in the neighborhood of Dr. John Dube, who was the first president of ANC, of Isaiah Shembe, Reverend Isaiah Shembe, who had a huge spiritual movement in South Africa, which was a traditional spiritual movement. And they had a lot of contact with each other. And as I grew up, we also had a lot of contact with Ohlangye, which was the settlement that was established by Dr. Dube.
So some of it was very much a site of that early uprising against apartheid,
right.
wasn't it?
Yes.
Just thinking about non-violence and how effective it is. For example, if we head to India, there has, of course, been the uprising around that dreadful gang rape on a bus, and death by that young medical student. And it seems to have mobilised more Indians than we've ever seen before around this issue of rape that really has gone unaddressed in India. Now, some are calling, for example, for capital punishment, for the death penalty for those young men. Now, this is not a solution for you,
No,
obviously.
absolutely
But what
not.
would be a solution to something that seems so intractable?
I believe, and my grandfather, always said that you must look for the cause, not just treat the symptoms, which is what we often do. We treat the symptoms and we don't look for the causes. If you go down to look at the causes for such violence, and particularly violence against women, and you look at, for instance, the number of female feticides that occur in India, the kind of
Feticides.
In a number of communities where women are regarded as less than human beings, and in that kind of society, you would find that people don't respect women. And so perhaps one of the starting points would be to begin to look at how can we sensitize our communities towards gender equality and, treat that problem at the beginning and then look at other issues.
So if we head back to South Africa,
Yeah.
where again domestic violence is endemic, it seems,
Yeah.
terribly so.
Yeah.
And the Pistorius case has illustrated that, and again
right.
ignited a conversation around that as well. Do we, when we're looking at a cause, do we say, well, this is the legacy of the trauma of apartheid, or do we say that post-apartheid we haven't properly addressed inequality in this society and it's still entrenched? Can we put that scale of violence down to those sorts of explanations?
I think it's one of the causes, but not the main cause for the violence that goes on in South Africa. I think there are a number of things. Number one is proliferation of arms. And I think that is a cause all over the world where you have arms. And in Pistorius' case, you can see that he was a collector. He was actually planning to get 6 more guns. He had applied for them.
I didn't know that. I haven't seen that.
Well, that was the news before I left South Africa, that he had made applications. So proliferation of arms is one thing. If you have arms, then you're bound to use it. And sometimes it becomes fatal the way it did here. And there's no reversing once you've killed somebody. You can cry, but you're not going to get that person back. It's over. So that is one of the causes. The second one is the whole question of how do we view women. Now, when we looked at apartheid, it was about race, class, and gender. Those were the 3 issues on which people were being oppressed. And gender oppression was very rife during the apartheid times. It's again a question of power relations. It's economic power, it's power of the muscle, and that sort of thing. So one needs to tackle those kinds of issues. Again, it's not only in South Africa, internationally, even in India, it's the same power relations that, cause. That's one of the causes.
Is it about taking small boys and educating small boys about what's acceptable and what's not in terms of how they relate to the other gender? I mean, I'm just thinking about the approach of the International Centre of Nonviolence that you're establishing, or that you will be a patron of here in Australia, but that you also are involved in South Africa and founded. How do we think about this?
Yes, that was one of the reasons why we started the International Centre of Nonviolence, because we think that this starts right from the early childhood level. And I may say something that may, not be acceptable to a lot of people, but I would plead that let's think about it. Because as a woman, I'm a mother, you're a mother, and we bring up our children and we differentiate between boys and girls. So are we aware of gender equality? So it doesn't start only with boys, it starts with us as well. And you read that, quotation from Gandhiji, be the change you wish to see. And it applies to us directly.
We don't want to blame mothers for the violence of society, given that they are also the subjects of that violence. But mothers will be listening to us now and wondering, well, where does it start for me? I'm doing my very best to nurture my children in a way that and nurture them with values that I hope will set them up for a loving lifestyle.
I think the most important thing is we as mothers can begin to start thinking of how we bring up our daughters and our sons. So we can begin to, have an equal approach to bringing up our sons and daughters. So what you said at the beginning about teaching the little boys, respect for their sisters, respect for other girls, and teaching girls as well that you're not inferior.
Well, that's the difference. There's respect, and then there's also you're my peer, which is a different layer again,
Yes.
isn't it? I wonder, Ela, whether the Oscar Pistorius case will be an opportunity for mass education that we haven't seen before in South Africa.
I think so, because, it has, people have been talking about the issue of people who are involved in sports. Sports personalities have a very high profile in the country, in the world, and so on.
And definitely in Australia, massive role models.
Absolutely. And if they can, begin to take on this message and help us to promote this message of respect for women, of equity, equality, between the genders, of understanding gender, and beginning to understand the power relationship that does, in a very sort of, not an open, relationship, but subconsciously.
It's
we
also,
have
though, it
that.
seems to me about people also understanding the source of their own frustrations so that they don't feel that they need to take it out on the person in their own home,
Yeah.
isn't it? I mean, it's about kind of something deeper as well about their sense of self and their sense of empowerment.
Yes, absolutely.
And opportunity.
if we look at the patriarchal society, and if we see how it affects us in the home, and for instance, just on a very simple level, women work, very hard to bring up their children, to keep the home fires burning. And yet that is not recognized. It's not recognized in monetary terms. Nobody pays them for it. And a person, a male who goes out to work and earns the money, it's considered to be his salary, and not, nothing is given to the woman. So the woman remains insecure in terms of economics, and that's one of the reasons why they don't report, why they don't act when they are seeing signs of violence. And if you look at Pistorius's case, and if you believe the stories that have come out,
Yes.
because there have been many stories, and some have been positive for him and some negative against him. And if you read those stories, you will realize that there might have been something which could have warned Riva. I think it's Riva.
Riva,
Yeah.
of
It could have warned her that, this is the characteristic that can grow.
Look, thank you for joining us on the program this morning. There's so much we could talk about your past as well. I mean, I find that staggering, some of the stories from your own life. I'm very grateful that you've come into the studio today, and good luck with the launch of the International Centre of Nonviolence at New South Wales Parliament House tomorrow. Thank you, Ela.
Thank you so much. And I must say that it's not me as an individual. It takes a whole lot of people to do the kind of things that we want to do to change the world.
It takes a world.
Absolutely.
Ila
Thank
Gandhi.
you.
Thank you. Ila Gandhi, a peace and social activist in her own right, and also happens to be the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi as well. RN, your world.